So good morning. As the off-campus living advisor, I help all Queen students and I meet with students about where and how to look for a rental property. I help students understand the Residential Tenancies Act and their rights as a tenant. I'm unable to provide legal advice, but I can provide support with rental applications as well as lease reviews. I also offer tips on how to live with others, as well as landlord and housemate conflict resolution. So if you don't mind going to the chat, and if you're comfortable sharing, what have you heard about Kingston housing, housing searches, landlords, etc.? So if we could just take, maybe 30 seconds and go to the chat, that would be appreciated. I don't see anything yet, so that's okay if you're not comfortable with it. Okay, that on-campus living is guaranteed for first-year students. Okay. Just to clarify, I don't think it's actually guaranteed, but it is typically for first-year students. Okay, so we'll come up with some other comments as we go through the presentation. So just something to think about. So I do want to talk about common terminology. So as you're navigating the Kingston rental market, here's some common terms that you really should be aware of. So a lease agreement is a contract between you and the landlord. It is a commitment. So leases are typically a 1-year lease term. The lease sets out the rules of the tenancy, and it's important to note that with a fixed term lease, if you are planning to move out at the end of the fixed term, so the date stated on the lease, you'll still need to give a minimum 60 days notice prior to the end date of the lease that you want to leave. If you want to stay, no notice is required as all fixed term leases go month to month, and you are not required to sign a new lease in order to stay. When you are ready to then move out, you are required to provide a minimum 60 days notice. So for applications, so to rent an apartment, room, or house in Ontario, landlords will typically ask for an application and a combination of a few things. So a rental application, a credit check, verification that you are a student, as well as references. And for references, they're looking typically for landlord references. So if you've rented before, a landlord reference. An application is essentially a summary form of a renter's information and provides relevant information about the possible tenant to the landlord. When you are interested in a property, you will need to complete an application, and this is common for most landlords and property management companies here in Kingston. Each process, though, may be a little bit differently or maybe a little bit different. So then there's deposit. So when your application has been accepted, you viewed the property, whether that's in person or virtually, and you then received a lease. You will then be asked to pay a deposit. This deposit is the last month's rent and will be applied to last month's rent only. It is important to note that a security deposit or a damage deposit is actually illegal in Ontario. So if a tenant damages something and the landlord wants them to replace or fix it, there is a different process for that. And it is illegal for landlords to ask for security or damage deposit in advance. So a guarantor or a co-signer is a person who agrees to take basically financial responsibility for you and your rent if you're unable to pay it. Some landlords will ask for a guarantor. Tenant rights and responsibilities. So the RTA is legislation within the province of Ontario that protects tenants and sets out rules for both the landlord and the tenant to follow. There are some exceptions, which I will touch base a little bit later. Apartment, house, condo are often the types of rentals you will come across and are common terms for rental properties. Utilities means heat, electricity, and water. Electricity is often referred to here in Ontario as hydro. There are monthly charges. These are monthly charges, and it is important to note that depending on the rental property, they may be included in your monthly rent, but they also may not be, so could be extra costs that you need to think about. So eviction is a formal procedure that is managed by the Landlord and Tenant Board of Ontario. Every landlord must follow a series of steps to legally evict a tenant. If a landlord verbally asks a tenant to leave or writes them an email or a note asking them to leave, this does not begin the formal eviction process. And then bylaws, these are city municipal laws, different from provincial and federal laws. So an example could be property standards or the noise bylaw. So it's really important to know your rights. So basically from start to finish, this is what the process for renting looks like. You need to make sure that you have your documentation ready, set up property viewings, and we'll chat about virtual showings and how to navigate that process shortly. Once you receive a lease, you need to make sure that you're reviewing it and that you understand it before signing it. And once your lease is signed and your deposit, which is your last month's rent, is paid, the process is pretty much done. So you do need to decide what type of living situation works best for you and your budget. If you are living with others, take the time to have an honest conversation with one another. You need to be able to live together, so it is important that you are talking about your definition of clean versus theirs, how will chores be handled, etc. It's also super important to note that once your lease is signed, you can't get out of it. A lease is actually a legally binding contract. If moving in with other people who already have a house and they were maybe looking for another housemate, be sure to meet all of them before you make an agreement. Kingston is expensive, so please be aware of that. The perfect property actually does not exist, so please give yourself as many options as possible and use all of your resources when searching for a rental property. Everyone's needs are different, but a main common need is the proximity to campus and budget. The more amenities you need or you want, the more expensive it typically will be. It's also important to note that the closer you are to downtown or campus, also likely more expensive. If you are willing to have a bit of a walk or take public transit, so Kingston Transit is our bus system, this may help you expand your search. Be prepared for the possible need of providing a guarantor or a cosigner. Have your documentation ready and note that it is very common to be asked for confirmation of enrollment, like enrollment at Queen. So if you are asked for this, you can get it through your Solus account. It is also important to know your tenant rights and be prepared. So everyone has a different definition of cleaning, so it is really important that this is discussed in advance. How are chores being managed? If utilities are not included in the property, how are these getting paid? Who will set up the account and take the lead to notify when payment is due? Chatting about guests and respecting each other's space is also really important. So we do have a housemate agreement form on our website that students can use to open the communication on many of these topics. It's really important to understand joint and several liability. So this is when you all sign the lease together, you're all financially responsible. The lease doesn't say that you're each paying for a room. It states that you are renting a property. This is also why it is extremely important to pick the right people to live with. So common problems between housemates. So the biggest one, just from my experience working with students, is cleanliness or one person always being the one to do all of the cleaning. So we do recommend chatting about putting together a chore schedule and working together to ensure it is kept up. Excessive noise and parties is sometimes also a big concern. We all come to university for different reasons, so it is extremely important to interview housemates in advance and to find people that you will be compatible to live with. For utilities, you are unable to set up a group account, so one person needs to set up the account and collect the money each month and ensure the bill is paid. Chatting about common possible problems in advance and how you will navigate this is really important. And open and calm communication is key to living with other people. So navigating the Kingston rental market can be challenging. A healthy vacancy rate is 3.8%, and currently Kingston is at approximately 4%. So it has improved over the last few years. Rental prices can go up for a variety of factors. And based on this slide, a room in a shared home can range anywhere from $750 Canadian, anywheres up to $1,300 Canadian. A one bedroom or a bachelor apartment can range anywhere from about $1,400 to $2,400 Canadian. And that doesn't mean that it's coming furnished or include utilities. So you do need to just be aware of that. So these prices are based on a variety of factors. Living with others is more affordable, and the closer you are to campus or downtown, usually more expensive. It's also really important to note that Kingston may be more expensive than you might realize. It's also important to note that the landlord mindset changes when close to campus. So when landlords own properties closer to campus, they're thinking, how much can I get per bedroom? The farther from campus tends to be less expensive. More amenities typically means more expensive. You also need to consider other costs than just rent. So a lot of people expect apartments to come furnished. This is very rare, so you do need to budget for furniture. Tenant insurance is sometimes required and is approximately $20 to $30 a month per tenant. If it's not required by the landlord or indicated in your lease, it is recommended that you still get it. So to prepare for a showing, you want to ensure that you've researched the landlord, that you know the application process of this particular landlord, and have all of your documentation ready. Prepare your questions in advance. And if you're not sure what to ask for a showing, please reach out to our office for some standard questions that you can utilize during your showing. You're always welcome to email us, or that resource is also available through our housing resource package online, where you can just download the questions and take with you. Don't rush, be efficient in your research, and make sure you're doing your due diligence. You will also want to make sure you're being professional and polite. You want to be seen as the most suitable tenant. So what to look for during a showing? So a showing is when you view the property before signing a lease or before making any commitment to it. It is extremely important to view the property prior to sending any money or before signing a lease. A showing is an opportunity for the landlord to sell you on the property. Does it appear to be well taken care of? All major cities in North America do have rats and mice. They aren't all over the place, but if properties aren't taken care of, then you might see them or signs of them that they are there. Broken windows, water stains on the ceiling are all signs that the landlord doesn't take care of the property. Look for mouse traps, mouse rat dirt. If you see signs of this, again, there may be some issues with the property. If possible, talk to the current tenants. Why are they leaving? Are there issues with the house? And ask them what the landlord is like. Is the landlord responsive to maintenance requests? Talking to current tenants is typically only possible when you do an in-person showing and the current tenants are still living in the property. So when you're conducting virtual showings, because you're not in Kingston, you can ask the landlord if they can put you in contact with the current tenants, but please note that the landlord is actually not obligated to do this. There are also privacy concerns and processes that the landlord would have to go through in order to share contact info, so that may not be possible. So in-person showings are always the preferred method, but for students out of province or out of country, in-person is not possible. A virtual showing is the next best thing, and it is important to note that a virtual showing is not a video or photos posted online or received via email. A virtual showing or virtual walkthrough can be done through FaceTime or a similar app. You would treat the virtual as an in-person showing. If possible, use a larger screen, tablet, or laptop as opposed to your cell phone. The issue with a virtual viewing is that the landlord controls the viewing. So you do need to take control back and ask them to open that door or drawer, point the camera to the ceiling, etc. This is an opportunity for the landlord to sell you on the property. So it's really important that you're asking lots of questions and getting a good understanding if the property and what you see will work for you. I also suggest to students that you request that the landlord show you the outside of the property. That way you can see street view as well. It also allows you to then take all of that information and compare it to Google Maps, as well as the photos shared on the original listing to ensure that things match what you are being told. So unfortunately, housing fraud and scams do happen. And this slide indicates some of the key things to identify that it is a scam. So some scam artists will use fake email addresses, claim to work for Queens or a real estate company, use real pictures of Kingston properties that they've basically taken offline, or offer to provide fake documents to verify their ownership. So you really want to be careful. Is the landlord pressuring you for money to be sent? Repeated pressure for money to be sent before leasing or doing a property viewing? Using sayings like, I have others that will rent without viewing. Again, all of these are red flags. Improper grammar and spelling mistakes during communication, and the email name does not match the name on the listing. So you really do need to trust your gut. If it seems too good to be true, it likely is. So please do walk away. So you want to make sure that you're educating yourself on rental scams as much as possible. International students and students out of province are often the ones typically scammed. So please just be aware of this and always proceed with caution. If it is too good to be true, chances are it is a scam. The big takeaway here is that you should never send money without viewing the property, whether that's in person or virtually. Always view the property to confirm that the ad is legit and that the property does exist. Always ask for a viewing. I can't stress that enough. Students often say, well, I'm not in Kingston, so I can't view it in person. And that's fair, but we do encourage students to see if a friend they trust could view on their behalf. And if that's not possible, ask for the virtual showing. So by virtual, this is a face-to-face real-time video call. And that's basically what today is. If all of our cameras were on, that's a real-time face-to-face video call. By virtual, it's a face-to-face real-time video call. Many scammers will send a video and say that's a virtual showing. A video or photo sent through email is not a virtual showing. Often, students are asked for a deposit to view the property. This is a big red flag. Do not send money in hopes of viewing the property. Again, please don't send money in order to view a property or before viewing a property. If the landlord gives you an excuse as to why they can't show you the property, that's a red flag and likely a scam. So please do your research on rental scams. If they ask for money in advance or say no to a viewing, walk away. If you see a post online, research the company or landlord. Call the company to confirm if the property is available. Does the number on the ad match the Google search for the company online? If the numbers don't match, call the number from the company's website that you found through Google, not from the ad. Some scammers will use names of common property management companies, but upon further research, information like phone numbers, etc., do not match. So it's really important to do your due diligence. Okay, so if you don't mind going to the chat, just a quick question. So in Ontario, landlords can ask for a security or damage deposit. Is this true or false? What are your thoughts on this? Okay, I'm seeing lots of falses. Amazing. So correct. The answer is false. In Ontario, landlords can only ask for a rent deposit, which is 1 month's rent and will be applied to the last month's rent. So to my understanding, many of you will be coming to Kingston for August or September. I would suggest to start looking now, but be mindful that you currently may see a lot of summer sublets being offered right now and not a lot of leases just yet for September. Common leasing cycles in Kingston are typically, so when leases would start and end, would be May 1st to April 30th, September 1st to August 31st, or September 1st to April 30th. In Ontario, with a fixed term lease, even with a specified end date, a tenant is required to give a minimum of 60 days notice prior to the end of the lease that they are leaving the rental unit. Keeping that in mind is really important. In situations where tenants have not signed a new lease and their current lease is now month to month, they are also required to give a minimum of 60 days notice that they are leaving the rental. It's also important to note that leases are typically 12 months and short-term leases are rare. So while properties are typically posted 60 days in advance to when they'll be available, and right now we are seeing a lot of summer sublets, you can certainly start the process. Just don't get too discouraged yet if you're not seeing anything just yet for September, because we're not quite within that 60 days just yet. You are seeing a few things, but just not the whole market at this time. So please make sure that you're taking some time to explore the resource package available on our website. And please make sure that you're using all the resources and websites available to you. So in our housing resource package that you can download, there is a document called Resources and Where to Look for Housing. So we can't recommend companies or things like that, but we can certainly provide you with these links that we know students are using to find housing. Okay. So please make sure that you're not limiting yourself to just one website. Unfortunately, there's not just one website that landlords post to. So you do need to make sure that you're using as many options as possible. So if there's 50 links on that document available through our website, please make sure that you're using all 50 links. It's really important to regularly schedule time in your daily routine to review the links. Setting aside an hour a day to send emails and arrange viewings will make a big difference in your search and your success. So I did want to quickly review subletting and lease assignments, as I know that some of you may only be in Kingston for 4 months, and as mentioned, leases are typically 12 months long. So to be honest, I don't think I've ever heard of a 4 or 6 month lease option. So a true sublet is when the tenant is leaving the unit for a set amount of time and has subleased the entire unit to another person. A lease assignment is taking over someone's lease. Occupant in this type of situation is not a sublet. An example is if it's a 3-bedroom house or apartment, 2 tenants are there and 1 tenant is going on exchange for the fall term, and you want to rent their room while they are away. This situation is often referred to as a sublet, but it is not a true sublet. It's also important to note that an occupant has no rights under the Residential Tenancies Act. At times, a sublet or a lease assignment is something that you may be looking for. And if that's something what you're looking for, it is best to treat them just as you would a regular rental search process. So for those of you coming to Queens or Kingston for just one term, a sublet or an occupant situation may be what you're looking for. It is very difficult to find a short-term rental from September to December here in Kingston. As I mentioned, most lease agreements are for 1 year, and since the rental market is quite tight, rarely are landlords flexible with rental periods. It can take a lot of effort, energy, and time. So a few approaches that you can take are renting a room in a house of pre-existing tenants where one individual is going on exchange for the fall term. So that would be that occupancy situation. Renting a property for a full 8-month term and then assigning the lease for the January to April term. But it is important to remember with this option is that there's no guarantee that you will be able to find someone. So please do keep that in mind. Connecting with students coming to Queen's University for the winter term, so January to April, and maybe signing a lease together. If you are going to go that option, just making sure that it's that you find someone that you feel that you're still compatible with because you would be financially liable for one another. So again, just keep that in mind. Or you'd work out with the landlord that you would each sign like a short-term lease, but both be committed to the property at different times. So if that's the case, you just need to make sure that it's very clear that you're for one term and they're for the second term. Or another common option that lots of students tend to go through is contacting local Airbnb properties to see if they would consider a short-term rental accommodation. So in terms of applications, it is really important to note that landlords and property managers will typically ask interested tenants to submit an application. Each has their own process and may be submitted through a website or paper form. In addition to the application, you may be asked to submit proof of enrollment, student ID, a guarantor, and references. It is important to note that you are not required to submit a deposit when applying to a property. Never send money without seeing the unit. So in terms of lease agreements, you want to make sure that you're familiarizing yourself with the Ontario Standard Lease, and there is a copy of the Ontario Standard Lease in our housing resource package available on our website. So in Ontario, the landlord must use the Ontario Standard Lease. Landlords do have a right to attach additional terms. Always make sure that you're reading the lease and any additional terms and that you understand it. I can review leases and point out if anything stated is not enforceable or if I notice any red flags. But please note that me or my colleague reviewing your lease is not confirming that the landlord is legit or that the property exists. You need to make sure you're doing your research and, doing your research and due diligence in advance before that. So unfortunately, we can't confirm any of those things. We're reviewing the lease to point out if anything is against the RTA. Keeping in mind that landlords can only ask for the last month's rent as a deposit, and landlords can ask for a key deposit, which is typically $25 to $75, and only used if the key is lost or not returned. Okay, so I have another chat question if you're comfortable with it. So you sign a 1-year lease agreement that expires on April 30th. If you don't sign a new lease, you need to move out on that date. Is that true or false? Okay, I'm not seeing anything yet, so we'll just give it a couple of seconds. What's your thought? Okay, I see false, false, false. Excellent. So correct, it is false. All fixed term leases in Ontario go month to month. If you plan to move out at the end of your lease, you need to provide a minimum 60 days notice through a form called an N9 prior to the end date on your lease. If you plan to stay, no notice is required and your lease automatically goes month to month. It is really important to note, though, that if you're living with others and you're on a joint lease, you are treated as one group. So one tenant can't just decide not to stay and the others go month to month. Unfortunately, it's either you all stay or you all go. So please just remember that when living with others. It is also really important that you're reading the lease agreement and understanding it before you sign it. So this slide lists some of the common things that landlords will ask for, even though they should not be. Some landlords will ask for you to sign an N11 form when signing your lease. An N11 is an agreement to terminate the lease at the end of the lease term. A landlord actually cannot require the tenant to sign an N11 agreement to end the tenancy as a condition of agreeing to rent a unit. A tenant does not have to move out based on this agreement if the landlord required the tenant to sign it when the tenant agreed to rent the unit. So please keep that in mind. Landlords can't also just come into your rental unit. They are required to provide 24 hours notice. If there is flooding or something like that, that is considered an emergency and an exception. So they then can enter without notice for emergency situations. Please ensure that you're reading and understanding your lease agreement before you sign it. It is a legally binding contract, and if you don't understand it or you have questions, please submit it to our office for review. It is also really important that you keep a copy of your lease. Often students will reach out to me with questions. I then ask for the lease and they advise they don't have a copy. So you can always ask the landlord for a copy, but you should really be getting a completed signed copy for yourself right from the very beginning. It's important to reference it throughout your tenancy in case you have questions or want to confirm something that you agreed to. So I just mentioned that the N11 on the previous slide, and this slide just shows an example of what the form looks like. Some landlords use this form to try and force you to move out by signing it. There are some exceptions if you're renting from Queens and community housing is your landlord. That information is stated very clearly on the form. In the province of Ontario, leases go month to month. So some landlords do use the N11 as a tactic for you to sign a new lease, as opposed to you not signing a new lease and going month to month. So if that's ever your situation and you have questions, please don't hesitate to book an appointment or reach out to us. So there are some exemptions from the Residential Tenancies Act, or RTA as I commonly refer to it. So it's important to know that you will not have protections under the RTA if you are renting with a direct family member of the landlord or the owner of the property. You're living with or sharing a kitchen with a direct member of the family, or you're renting and living with the landlord, so those room and board situations. So if you're doing any of those three scenarios, you will not have protections under the Residential Tenancies Act, and this means that if there are issues, you would need to go to small claims court. So moving in, it is really important that you protect yourself. Our office has a move-in inspection form that you can use to help you with the process. It's really important that if the landlord is not with you during move-in day, that you do your own inspection of the entire unit before you move in any of your belongings. So make sure that you're taking pictures of the property and note any damages. You're not doing this so that the landlord will necessarily fix the damages, but you're doing it so that you're not charged for them when you leave the property. If your lease states that you are required to get tenant insurance, then this is required and you do need to get it. This needs to be done in advance and show proof to the landlord before getting your keys, or they won't give you your keys. So if you are living with others, it is important that you do your part and treat others the way you want to be treated. As mentioned previously, you want to have open communication and discuss how chores and things will be divided within your household in advance. It's also important to chat about food. Are you going to share certain items or no? And it's really important that these discussions do take place. You don't want to take something that doesn't belong to you without asking first, because from my experience, that does cause conflict. So you just want to make sure that you're being upfront and sorting all of these things out in advance as much as possible. So these are some common notices from landlords. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you ever have questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out and you're always welcome to book an appointment. It is really important that you do your research and educate yourself on your rights as a tenant here in the province of Ontario. It's also important that with any of the common notices that landlords may use, it's important to know that there is a process for each and every one of them. So a landlord can't just kick you out or evict you. There is a process for that, and they would need to file with the landlord and tenant board. The process to get a hearing to determine if they can evict you can take several months or maybe even longer. Again, the key takeaway is that there's a process for every form. Okay, so if you're comfortable going to the chat, please answer yes or no. You are a tenant, rent is paid on time and in full monthly, but you've broken one of the many terms and conditions your landlord has added to your lease. The landlord has found out and is threatening to evict you as soon as next week by changing the locks. Can the landlord do this? I'll just give everyone a chance to answer. And it's okay if you're not sure, this isn't a real test. Okay, great. So correct. The correct answer is no, they can't. They need to complete the appropriate form and file with the landlord and tenant board. Again, the process can take several months to possibly a year. And again, if you're ever in that situation or you're not sure, please don't ever hesitate to reach out. So I do want to mention that Kingston has a property standards bylaw. So if you're ever having issues with your landlord regarding some property maintenance. Perhaps they won't fix something that's broken. There may be a way to force them to fix it by submitting a form complaint through property standards for review. If you do have issues with a maintenance or property deficiency, the first step is to always notify your landlord or the company. Written correspondence is always the preferred method. Notification by phone is acceptable, um, but it's always important to keep a copy of all correspondence for your records. If your request is not resolved, then you can file a complaint with the City of Kingston. There is a property standards form on their website that you would complete. And if you're ever not sure if this is the right process, depending on the issue, you can always reach out to our office and we can review the situation to determine what the next best step could be. Because in some cases, it may not be appropriate to go property standards. It may be more appropriate to file with the landlord and tenant board. And we can always chat that out. So I do just want to provide these two links for your reference. So I'm often asked about host families, and Canada Homestay Network is pretty common, and Spaces Shared, I would say, is pretty new over the last probably 5 years, but they're two common host family options. So our office is not affiliated with either program, and I'm not actually sure if there are families in Kingston on these platforms looking for students to share a space in their home, but I did just want to include the links for your reference. So you're more than welcome to explore these if this is something that maybe living with a local family is of interest to you. That would be kind of like the room and board scenario that I described earlier. So if I just wanted to mention that our office is hosting a virtual housemate social. So if you would like to try and join a group that may already have housing and is looking for another housemate, or you would like to maybe try to meet other students in the same situation as you looking for housing and form your own group to then apply to a property or be roommates and then apply to a property, you may want to consider attending this session. I do apologize that the time may not work for all time zones. Currently it is scheduled for 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on July 3rd. So I do believe that that's a Thursday. I will throw the link, just one moment, in the chat. I'll do that right now if you're interested. You would need to register, and then as we get closer, we'll follow up with the link. Okay. But yes, if you are looking, I know it is difficult, especially when you're living out of province, out of country, or even, in a different city in Ontario, to try to meet other people. So we are going to offer basically the virtual space for students to come together, exchange contact information, and then you can take it from there to continue those conversations and use the resources available on our website to figure out if the people you've met would be compatible for you to live with. Okay, and if you have questions about that, you can always reach out. So how to contact our office. So our email is ocla@queensu.ca. We do offer one-on-one appointments, or you're always welcome to email as well. If your email is maybe a bit more complicated and we need to actually meet, we'll let you know that. Or again, you're welcome to always book an appointment. Feel free to always reach out with any questions or concerns, and we'll do our best to always get back to you as soon as possible. There are also various ways to follow us on social media, and also be sure that you're checking out our website. I should have mentioned earlier, because Sergio was on the call at the very beginning, but had to drop off for a bit. But Sergio is our new off-campus living advisor, so there are now two of us. So appointments when you're booking will either be with myself or with Sergio. So hopefully moving forward, there won't be too many wait times, and you should be able to get an appointment within the next few days. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that if there are questions, we can go to questions.